Our next keynote speaker is Johna Burke, who is the Global Managing Director of AMEC, one of the world's leading measurement companies. Johna comes with over 20 years of experience with proven results in marketing, public relations, investor relations, general management, communication, strategy, operations for both B2B as well as B2C companies. Today at Praxis, she's going to unravel the secrets of measurement. She's going to talk about best practices in measurement and evaluation and how measurement can be used to build trust. Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring down the roof and let's welcome Johna on stage. Thank you so much, Johna.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time in India, and what an amazing gathering here at Praxis. So thank you so much for the invitation. It's absolutely wonderful. For those of you who are concerned when you see measurement and you're trying to not awkwardly race out of the room because you think there's going to be math involved, I'm asking you to please stay. This is the part of the presentation where this session is going to help you build trust with your clients and with the C-suite. Measurement is a powerful tool, and when you use it correctly, it's going to make you the most trusted advocate in your organization and the go-to and the reliable person whenever you have a problem, a crisis, or you're looking to excel with something. If we can go ahead and get this.
Peter, come take a look at this.
Look at this.
What's this? The numbers, they keep getting bigger and bigger.
Clicks are off the charts.
Yeah.
Yoshi, it's Walter. We're back.
I need more trees. More trees? I'll get you more trees.
Hey, take a look at wood pulp.
Everything you got to put up right now.
He really loves that thing.
Thank you to our friends at Adobe for so perfectly summarizing the current state of some communications plans, right? If you are talking to your C-suite about clicks and likes, you are doing it wrong. If you are talking to your customers about impressions, you are doing it wrong. And that is a very dangerous environment. So what we're going to talk about is giving you some tools, some resources for how you can bridge that conversation, how you can have that conversation with your clients to really be able to help them. How many of you would love it if there was a silver bullet? Come on, be honest, right? Everybody would like this to be really easy. So many times, I get the question, what is the one metric that I need to use? And my answer is always, what is the one problem you are trying to solve, right? There is no universal silver bullet. And that's a good thing because to the best of my knowledge, silver bullets only work with werewolves, right? That is the only known entity that a silver bullet actually cures that problem. So unless your C-suite or your clients are werewolves and you are trying to annihilate them, the quest for the silver bullet is probably a false quest. You can let it ease. It is over now for you. A lot of times we start because setting objectives and setting purpose for what you're trying to measure and what you're trying to do is the most important beginning, right? And you have to start at the beginning. How many of you are familiar with SMART objectives? Great. So for those of you not, SMART are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. But wait, she says, you see an extra E and an R here. What do these mean? We've added these. The extra E is for ethical. Are your objectives ethical for what you're trying to accomplish? And the R is, are they revolutionizing? Are you doing something that really matters? Are you doing something that's going to matter to the business, to the end result, to your organization? Because oftentimes, some of our communications friends, they get so wound around the axle of some of their activities that they unfortunately set forward objectives that are dumb. Doesn't understand my business. right? If we are looking at only our activities and not talking about the impact and the evolution that it's going to have on the business, it minimizes the effect and the impact that communications can have. So be brave, be bold, put those objectives out there for what you're trying to accomplish. If you're going into a client for the first time or you're going into your C-suite, making sure that you have a foundation and kind of setting a proper assessment of where you are is one of the trickiest parts. So at AMEC, we are the Association for Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. We work with volunteers, so they willingly and passionately come forward with these ideas. And that's what brought to us the Maturity Measurement Mapper. We call it the M3, mostly because I probably say this more than anybody, and I would get wildly tongue-tied, and it would be very distracting. So we call it the M3. And what this is a diagnostic. So now, within about 8 minutes, you can go through, you can answer some questions, and you can understand within that time, are you at the basic level, are you at an interim level, or are you at an advanced level for measurement? Doing this with individual clients, doing this with individual projects can be incredibly empowering, mostly because they're simple questions. So there's no tricks, there's no delusion of, oh, are we answering this right? Then you can go through and it's going to tell you where you are in that process, right? So now you're going to be able to, after 8 minutes, determine, here's where we are and here's what we need to do to skill up. Right? And that's sometimes the trickiest part. So putting that prescriptive forward based on your responses is going to be empowering. So now you've invested this time, you can take this back to your client, you can get the agreement of where you need to go and what you need to do. One of the most sought after skills for hiring both consultants, employees, is cognitive thinking. Cognitive critical thinking, right? People want people who they know are thinking, not just kind of droning through and passing them off information, but being able to give a prescriptive, being able to give them something that is of substance, something that's going to help them. One of the basic tools, and we heard a mention of it earlier, the Barcelona Principles. How many of you are familiar with the Barcelona Principles? Excellent. We look to have 100% hands up in the coming years. This is our benchmark. The Barcelona Principles, these are the 2.0. These were updated in 2015, which might as well be a lifetime ago. But these are a fabulous foundation to be able to go through. And when you're talking, you can say, these are the foundation for what we're trying to do. These are these core principles. The first being goal setting and measurement are fundamental to communications and public relations, right? If you have a project and you don't have a goal or an objective that you're trying to do, you're just doing stuff. And I managed a PR and IR team, and I always started to feel very anxious when I had this one team member who always looked very busy. Always the busiest person in the room, very busy, had just, was leaving for vacation, come back from vacation, hadn't been on vacation, but always very busy, furrowed brow, Doing a little bit more research, I found out that this person was also an avid video watcher during work time. So that frustration, that sour face was more about being caught watching videos during work than actually working. So understand what are the goals and the objectives are that people are working on, right? Because if you don't have a goal and people are just doing stuff, there isn't a quantifier, there isn't a measurable, there aren't very clear KPIs that people are looking to work against. And one of those important things is setting objectives with the people that you're talking about, right? Because we talk about a common language. There is no such thing as a common language when it comes to expectations, right? We like to think, oh, I'm the easiest person to deal with. I just want things that are simple. Well, simple to me might mean pristine, clear, timely. We don't know what simple means. So make sure that when you're setting those goals and objectives, you ask those questions back. You're probing and saying, well, what do you mean by that? What does success look like to you? And get a very clear example of what that is so that when you come back at the end of the program, at the end of the project, you're able to say, we have accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, or here's how we missed the objective, and here are the reasons why. One of the reasons that a lot of groups unfortunately miss those is because they are measuring outputs as opposed to outcomes, right? We sent out the release, we have this coverage, we were able to get a couple of interviews, our earned media, we have a social media coverage, but if that isn't driving the business for what is important to the organization, it just doesn't matter. right? And so, especially now in an age of earned media where fake news, there's such a proliferation. We'll talk a little bit about share of voice and some of those other elements, but I mean, one of the key factors that you should be looking at is how the information that you're measuring against is sourced. I will take very awkwardly a piece of gratitude to President Trump, who has taught us many valuable lessons about communications. Sometimes we learn the best lessons by the tragedy of others, and this is no exception to that. The first and most important thing is that transparency does not equal trust, right? Everyone in this room, everyone in the world knows every thought this person has, and we are all repulsed by it, we recoil from it, but that is transparency. However hideous and ugly it is transparency. So make sure that you understand what you're trying to accomplish. Probably the other best piece of communications tips that he's given is how to absolutely trample your message, right? In this day and age of everything being fast and on demand and digital, we all are so hasty that we want to make sure that we're pushing. But sometimes it's when we take a breath, right? Let that message breathe. Let it be absorbed by those around us. And don't immediately take up some other cause and trample on the messaging and the vocation that you've put out there. So let us take those lessons, leave a lot of the other bad things behind, and take it as a good piece of information. You're able to do that by using the AMEC framework. The AMEC framework is, again, another resource online that you can use and input all of your objectives, and then it's going to tell you what those inputs are. There is a taxonomy behind the framework that is a great way to get to that common language with your teams, right? Who is responsible? Who is accountable? Who is the champion of this piece of information? How are we validating that data? Where is it coming from? How will we use it? Is it an API? Is it reliable? Is it trustworthy? All of those elements can be handled at this planning stage. And that is going to make you much more effective, much more trustworthy when you get to the point that you're looking to show and demonstrate the outcomes to your overarching business organization. Sometimes people will be confused and say, I just don't know how we're supposed to do that. One of the fastest and easiest ways is to determine how your client or how your organization makes and spends money, right? It's not all about the money, but that is a great way to be able to determine where they invest their time and resources and how you can drive and impact those values there. Another is how the effective organizational performance can and should be measured where possible. And this is where some of the external features of trust and purpose are all coming into play. And it's a matter of understanding where those are in the ecosystem, right? Where do those lie in the overall value proposition of your organization and how you're going to impact those? Is it reputation? Is it the overall exposure that you're looking for? Because more and more, so many times people are trying to chase a sales number. They want attribution to sales. Relationship management isn't always attribution to sales. When I was the PR director many, many moons ago, one of the things that I implemented was, this is when we were doing clip books, so get your time machine and wrap your head around that. But I would actually have our art department create a couple of mock-up headlines of what would have been in the news had we not had good relationships with the particular reporters, had we not had that opportunity to talk about the facts and the story of what was going on. Granted, I probably was notorious for maybe an occasional picture photoshopped of my CEO being lowered into a police car under arrest. Maybe. That's always an attention-grabbing opportunity for them, if you will. But it's what they didn't see. And that's exactly what I called it. Here's what you aren't seeing in the headlines now because of good public relations, because of good communications. And those are some of those invisibles that you can't measure unless you are so in tune with what you are working on and what you are doing of how you're impacting the overall reputation of your organization. This is one of the from a consulting firm that I found that probably gives the best resource guide if you're trying to figure out a way how to set and manage your goals and objectives to things that matter to the business. And I call this ERIC because you can increase, reduce, improve, and create these different elements, these different assets of your business by good communications, right? So many times we have groups and they're talking about ROI. Very few people in communications are actually measuring ROI. At best, they're doing a cost valuation, right? Because they're able to say, okay, we spent this much money, we have this many people on the team who are doing it, and here's what we saved. But they aren't able to go in and actually look at fully weighted cost at what they're looking at for the full series and sequence of information. ROI is a financial term. ROI, when you put it on any type of a communications report, if you aren't dealing with fully weighted numbers within your organization, you will be outed immediately by any CFO worth his weight to say, oh, interesting. Our art people are now talking about numbers. This should be fun, right? It's like chum in the water of a shark. It's like, so tell me about the numbers that you used behind this. We paid a vendor to do this? Yeah, you're gonna have to do a lot better than that. So just like anything else, in a goal and in an ambition to try to be relevant with the C-suite and with the people that you're talking about, don't misuse information and don't misuse those numbers either. Because measurement needs to be qualitative and quantitative, right? So many times we're out there and we see programs globally, and people are measuring what they can measure, what it's easy to get their hands on, right? That becomes the default of what's included in a measurement program. And that has bred what I like to call the graphic seduction of public relations and communications, also known as chart porn, right? We get so excited about, ooh, the font that they're going to use. Is it our color palette? Ooh, that's not my orange. We need gray here. This isn't in our scheme. And in the meanwhile, all of this data that's going on behind it, we haven't validated it. We haven't asked for any transparency of how it's taken in. Is this an API? Is this a statistic sampling of data? Is this all of the data? But we are presenting the most beautiful chart that our eyes have ever laid on, right? Don't kid yourself. That's where it comes in. People take a look at it, they look at each other like, that's purple, pass, right? So make sure that you understand the narrative, that you're giving context, that you're giving a layover of that so that you aren't minimizing all of the effort and the work that you're doing. The next Barcelona principle, AVEs are not the value of communications. Is anybody still using AVEs? This is not a public shaming, this is a safe space. You are using AVEs, we understand. We are giving you tools so that you can stop using AVEs. This is really being vetted out through the market itself, right? The change in media, the change in the environment, the change in the consumer has really made AVEs a diminishing value prospect anyways. Some people are still using it, and they're using it because they have a benchmark, right? They have a long history of gathering and collecting this data. And when used in an index, they're able to then see any types of pivots, right? They're able to see, is some activity going to create some causation for what else they're trying to do? We recommend you get off of AVEs. We recommend that you're using it, not being seduced by the fact that it has a dollar sign and now you're producing the same type of information that marketing is, because you're not, and that's okay. But that you do make sure that you are using a best practice and you are having an example. You are creating a narrative around what you're trying to do and what you're actually trying to produce there. And this is another that when we look at the peso model and earned media and owned media, social kind of gets a little bit diluted. It gets a little bit brought into a whole separate sphere, right? Because people talk about it's fast, it's reliable, I can get this information, I know who these people are. Okay, but you should for all of the media, right? Because it's a mix, it's a balance. Your consumers aren't consuming only on social media. There was an interesting article that came out maybe a week ago, I don't know. I'm not too sure what day of the week it is today, to be honest with you. I think it's Friday, but I don't say that confidently, based on travel. So maybe a week ago, and Facebook advertisers can now share articles and edit the link to the article. So they can, instead of just forwarding and making that available, what the headline of an article is, they can actually edit that. Now behind that will be the actual article, and they can't edit that within the context, but they can edit it within a sharing environment. I mean, if that doesn't create a whole other element to chaos news, I don't know what does, right? But those are some of the elements of social media and why there is a challenge with the ethics, with the credibility of some of that data. So even though it's fast, it shouldn't be the end-all be-all. And make sure that you see that correlation, right? So you see a correlation for how you're working with information, what that impact is, where are those areas that you're going to be able to see a high turn or a high promise once that's validated for you. Because it has brought on vanity metrics. And I argue that the reason this is a problem is because, you know, probably all of us have a little bit of vanity in us, so we can relate to that. And I contend that that's probably a problem. If we were being honest, we would call these ghost metrics because they are incredibly scary if they are the basis that you are putting forth for all of your effectiveness and your efforts, right? No one wants to have something that is elusive, transparent, not believed in by most people, right? I only believe it when I see it. That's what makes it a ghost metric, is because it isn't something that's reliable, it isn't quantifiable, and it does have kind of that spherical change to it that makes it very scary. All of your measurement and evaluation should be transparent, consistent, and valid. I was in a session the other day, and they were talking about, you know, grading your own homework and why the fox shouldn't be guarding the hen house. And there's a lot of truth to that. And I know that one of the examples that we talk about in AMEC is especially with, you know, working with agencies. So our agency members have formed an initiative called Common Ground. And that is the agencies who are doing measurement, who are doing evaluation, they now have a forum where they can share, putting all of the competition aside, to really talk about best practices so that this environment in this market can thrive, can move forward. There's always going to be that special sauce, right, that's put on at the end. There's always going to be that narrative. There's always going to be that person that they're working with that knows a lot about data and is going to be able to contextually layer something in. But as far as the validation of data, those are basics, those are staples. And anyone who can't tell you exactly how they're gathering information for you, what that methodology is, so that that's replicable for you, so that you can go back and you can say with confidence, here's where our data comes from, it's validated, this is why we're paying for it, this is how it's sourced, that's going to be a trick for you. A lot of people are talking about AI, you know, oh, everything's going to be so much easier with AI, AI is going to revolutionize everything. I mean, I will say, just as a side note, I'm a Gen Xer, so I am mildly petrified of AI. I mean, I grew up in the time of Terminator. That didn't work out great for us, you know? It worked out terrible for us. And if any of you have seen the video of the dogs from Boston University, have you seen this video? Where these dogs come up, these little robot dogs, they go up and they, you know, they find a closed door and the first dog looks at it and looks back at the other dog and the other dog walks up, opens the door handle and lets the dog out. I'm like, that is not great. Like, I have a tiny little dog. I love him to pieces. If I was walking down the street and a robot dog started chasing me and I knew that a closed door wasn't going to save me, I'm not happy. These are not good things, right? So understanding how and what AI can influence in your measurement is just as good, and I would caution you to be just as skeptical. There are things, there's narrow AI, right? So there's Siri, there's Hey Google, they have a very singular focus of what they're trying to do. And then there is the broader, the general AI. This is a hotel in Japan, and it is run all by robots, right? So the promise is that it's cheaper because it's run all by robots, but I mean, that is and they do have 2 humans who are there working all of the mechanics at any given time. But I don't know how many of you have been traveling, I don't know, globally, domestically, and sometimes just with another person, you have a real hard time communicating, right? We've all been on those calls. If you want to get help, then please say or enter in your membership number. 432BX. The number you entered was 43ZYK. No, that's not correct, right? Can you imagine having this be the entire time that you were at a hotel? There's no relaxation, there's no calming there. And the thing that AI will help with are counts and amounts, right? AI is going to make that element of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to aggregate data very fast. Facial recognition is a great example of kind of machine learning. We can teach machines how to read and understand certain things, certain elements, but it's not perfect. And here's the reason why. I don't know if any of you are any car fanatics in the audience, but this is a $350,000 Bentley. It's a pretty hefty price tag for a car, and the license plate says modest. Yes, I took this picture. Yes, I was confronted by the person in the car afterwards who thought I was, enamored by his car. He was less enamored when I explained that I was using it as a matter of irony in a presentation, but that's probably a drink conversation later. But the point being is that irony won't be picked up. We can't teach irony to a computer. And so that goes back to that critical thinking that we always have to be looking at things with the lens of what are the areas of focus? What are those elements that are really going to matter to our business, to our organization, and how we can do those? Because the inadequacy of communications is that we have a sense of fear of failure. And I would tell you that's the one thing that you need to shed immediately, because when you report to clients, when you report to your CEO, those people are not successful because they always succeed. They are successful because they know how to handle a failure. They know how to find learnings from within that failure, apply those so that they do better and run faster and stronger the next time. And I would encourage all of you to dig within. Understand why your programs work, why they don't work, be able to look at them and assess and evaluate so that you can make sure that communications and public relations are the most reliable source moving forward in your organization for reliable information, for value added, and for the leadership that you know that it takes to be able to make you successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. That was really insightful, and I think everybody's that much more, hopefully, clearer about measurement and evaluation. For me personally, it was fabulous because I don't know if I mentioned, I do teach a class in a communications institute back home in Bombay on measurement, and a lot of this rings so true. And I love the way you started with, it's not only about maths, so don't get worried, because we've all, in the communication space, I don't think any of us wanted to major in maths, which is why we came to communication, and we majored in English and social sciences and so on. But yes, I think the whole value of measurement in the work we do is, I don't think we can forget that. And we need to keep being reminded of why we need this to really stand out, and not be just seen as the people who do the press relations and put the news out there and do the distribution, and actually be seen truly as consultants to the business, and like we were chatting earlier, be seen as strategic advisors to the senior leadership in an organization. So it was exciting. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on Q&A. We already did a bit of a tic-tac, and I think we talked so much earlier, but we will take off from some of the parts that you spoke about today. You touched upon the need for quantitative and qualitative models, and one of the challenges we as communicators face is we often get caught up in the quantitative because that's more easily available. Right? It's a lot of times it's secondary data. Where we get stuck is the qualitative data, or where you're actually having to talk to people and understand what do they think, feel, and believe about a business and a brand and the communication it does. So in your view, how do we navigate this? How do we get to the qualitative data that is needed to do the right communication?
First and foremost, for communicators, the qualitative data should be the easiest, right? Because you're already good communicators. You're already good at asking the who, what, when, where, and why, right? And so once you're looking at the information that you're reviewing and understanding what you're measuring against, that makes it that much more meaningful. And you become less reliant, but you'll start to see correlations of the quantitative data. And that's where it gets exciting. So where you start to see those intersecting points, that's where you're starting to show growth, show balance, show relevance of what you're trying to do. But I would contend that the qualitative data is absolutely the easiest for communicators to be able to drill into and to understand better if you have the confidence. And time again, it really is that fear of failure. It's that wringing of the hands of, oh, I don't know, did we get the results that we needed? Well, if you don't start with a clearly stated objective, then it's very difficult, it's impossible, to understand if you've achieved what you were looking to achieve. And that's what makes qualitative intimidating and scary.
I'm glad you touched upon the objective, because that was going to be my next question. Setting a goal for our communication program. I can't tell you how much we agonize over that one, because goals are typically spread awareness, create recognition, create credibility. They're just such lofty goals without actually going into, so what are we supposed to do and what are we measuring? And I think that's one of the big challenges, and I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about how can you actually set the right objectives and goals when you're measuring, because like you said, it starts from there. And unless you have that right, very often you don't know what you're measuring. And I think you talked about the whole chart porn part of it, where you're just looking at the beautiful charts but don't know what's the story behind it and what's the data that you want behind it. And I think I speak for all my colleagues here, a lot of times that's where we first need to challenge ourselves. So can you tell us?
I can. So one of the best ways to get started is to work through what success looks like, right? And that seems like a lofty. What does success look like? When we're all done with this engagement, with this program, with this initiative, what you, client, CEO, whoever is approving the budget, managing the budget, what does success look like to you? What will it look like when we're finished? And based on some of those answers, that's what helps you formulate that goal. And sometimes it does. Increase awareness. Well, if someone has increased awareness and they have a program that has 30 billion impressions, yet they can't walk out on the street and have one person tell them any information about it, then that's not real awareness, is it? Right? So it's understanding those nuances of what that means, and it's also understanding how you can then back into that with some data that you have available to you. Normally, it's not just earned media coverage, social coverage, but you do have to lower those silos internally and talk about that integrated market model of what that looks like for, we know that when someone does a PR program, it can be successful. We know when someone has an advertising program, it can be successful. But what we also know that we don't talk about nearly enough is when an advertising program and a marketing program work together, those results, while success historically is great, they are amplified and they're made that much better. And so the more we work together, the more we look to interweave that data, see what's available, see how we can work with that with what we're doing, that's what what gives you the ability to set a better and truly measurable objective.
So this bit about measuring integrated campaigns, right? And where PR has done something, advertising has done something, on-ground experiential has done something. How does it all come together for finally talking about the success of whatever the brand initiative or campaign was? And very often when brands do what is called a brand track or a brand study, somehow all the accolades and the rewards go to the advertising campaign, because I guess it's most visible. And we get stuck with talking about output. And then we are scrambling to justify why we got you these many coverages and exposures across these publications. The bit that we shy away from is talking about outcomes or message delivery. Can you talk a little bit more about how can we do better measurement of message delivery and the outcomes part of it?
So there are several examples. I mean, when you're talking about what that integrated model looks like, we have some case studies on our website of people who have built up a program and driven the success of their program. Most recently is Diageo, which is a spirits company. And this was not something that was done overnight, over the course of a week, but over the course of months and a year of integrating all of that data and understanding where those data points are that they intersect, how they're amplifying one another. So it's not an easy message, which is why a lot of times we'll revert back to share of voice, right? Those things that we can kind of illuminate in some way or shape or form. And that does matter, right? But it matters contextually. So if you're trying to talk about reputation, but there's been some scandal mentioning your company, just that share of voice is not enough, right? Because you absolutely have been mentioned, but your stock price is down, you're not selling any widgets, and a third of your staff has to be fired. So again, understanding contextually what that means. But more than anything is when you're looking at an integrated market model is everyone needs to understand that they're working with data. And their data, and I guess this is where I go back to, in that environment, we all have to be grounded, right? And this goes back to having the validity of where your data is coming from, because when you're working with the marketing team, with the advertising team, they feel like, well, we have these clicks, we have this, we have that, that's great, that seems amazing. We have these numbers, and these are the numbers that we can validate, and having the confidence in those. But also having the ability to be humble, right? To realize that maybe part of your program didn't intersect with what they were trying to do, and some of the jargon that you use does miss the mark, and it is only used by your organization. And those are the things that you can work to improve and amplify in that program, to be able to say, this didn't catch on like we thought it was going to, back to the jargon factory, right? But how are real people talking about it? One of the things that I think is really important for people to understand is ephemeral search. And that is the search, so when you start to Google something and the recommendation based on what you've started to type comes up. That is something that is totally a Google algorithm. It isn't transparent to us. But if you don't understand some of those nuances, and I think that will become increasingly more important even than SEO in the coming years, because that is a black box, but that does influence people for what, if they are going to click on it. And jargon is never part of that, right? It's always a common language. It's always taking someone to the Wikipedia, or taking someone to YouTube. And again, that's that collusion of the social organizations being all intermingled, that they've drawn from their own nuances of that data. So you have to be smart about how you're talking about it, how you're tagging information in order to gain any relevance.
Another thing which I know a lot of us struggle with is very often you start measuring a campaign at the end of the campaign. Okay, all the work is done, everything is put together, we've done our event, we've got all of it. Now let's start figuring out how do we measure this and go back. And I think this is probably because of measurement is used either as a stick or a reward at the end of a campaign. Whereas there is clearly a different way of thinking, which I see what you're talking about, is measuring during the campaign, where you're able to actually bring in flexibility and you're agile in being able to change your messaging. And that's not just about intuition, but you actually use real data to be able to validate what your fears are or what you think is going to work, and then be able to quickly build into the campaign and use it. And we see it very often when in political campaigns, and the message analysis gets really well used there. I'm not sure, what do you think, how do companies, can we invest in something like that, on ongoing proactive measurement?
It's critical too. So many times that it has been historically, oh, it's finished, now we'll measure, and then the wringing of hands, oh, we don't have the budget to do it. So we'll just say, it feels like it was successful, right? And that's part of the problem, is that measurement has to be part of the DNA of every program that you do in order to be successful. It's kind of like if you sell insurance, and if you only ask someone to buy insurance, so if you think about the airline insurance, right? But if they didn't sell it before the trip, but only after the trip, how many people are going to buy it? Only the people that had problems, right? All of those other successful trips, oh, I don't need the insurance now because my trip is complete. And so if you're only using something when you have a problem, the model doesn't work, right? Insurance can exist if it's only existing to pay claims and not taking in any income or any revenue for those claims that they don't have to pay. Measurement and communications is very much the same thing. We have to believe that there is a great value to it and that we don't want to have to use it for a crisis, but that we do have it. We have that validation of looking forward, of being able to look inside and measure it along the way so that we can be agile, so that we can pivot, so that we can look at kind of these existential circumstances and think, this isn't the right time for this campaign. We've got to be able to retrench and then to play forward. And you can do that when you're using data as that, as opposed to feelings. And oftentimes what you'll find is that the data will validate that feeling that people have because it's coming from somewhere. But being able to put that in front of the numbers element of your organization will enable you to have that conversation much more easy and to make sure that they'll come to you in advance saying, okay, what's the data that we're going to be looking for in this? And then you'll find that it lowers those barriers internally, and they're saying, this is a really important program. How do we help you? How can my team give you some data? Would it help if you had some customer data? Would it help if you had some customer service data? I worked with an organization that was an insurance company in the US, and it's probably the best example of success because they had all of these elements, and they weren't, we would need to monitor and we want to know every time that we're mentioned. I mean, they weren't wired that way. But when there was a natural disaster, they would be very focused on that natural disaster, on that regional coverage of what they were doing. And they were able to, over the course of 18 months, reduce the overtime of their customer service agents by 30%.
Business impact.
True business impact, because they were able to see, okay, when we have a crisis, we know that our customer service goes on overtime, and that's now, they were looking at 17 days. It was also impacting their retention of employees because, we can manage a lot through 3 to 5 days if you know that there's an end in sight. But 17 days of just an absolute grind of going on and on, that's hard on anyone. And so they were able to put in all of these elements, and they started to know and diagnose the information of what were the calls that were coming in. So through communications, they were able to build better FAQs. They were able to start using texting services to give people at least some assurance so that they weren't sitting on hold for 45 minutes to an hour to try to just be told, yes, we will have someone out there. And so using text notifications. And they were able to take it down. So now even their customer service people knew when a crisis hits, they're looking at a 72-hour window, not a 10 to 17-day window. And that helped them retain good talent. It helped them lower the cost. And the CFO can actually see then the value of communications and lowering the costs that they were paying out. Real bottom line results.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared this example because one of the other big challenges we face in India, and I don't know what it is like globally, and I'd love to know from you, very often the cost of measurement is more expensive than the actual retainers that are sometimes paid out to, I talk from a PR agency point of view, and that's where then everybody says, okay, forget it. Let's just assume it went well. Broadly, we are doing okay and don't know. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you're actually able to show how the measurement is going to help us show better business impact and better business results, then hopefully we'll be able to get some more dollars on the measurement budget.
And you have to look at it as part of I think the mistake is looking at it as part of a separate entity. Yeah. It has to be a bolt-on. So it has to be, whether it's a partner, whether it's, you have designated staff that's, just focused on doing measurement, but it has to be part of every program that you do. And there are ways so that it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Yeah. You can look at statistical adequate samples of coverage and do some regression analysis on what you're actually trying to do. You can make sure that you have a tiered system so that you're only doing a more in-depth analysis of things that you know are going to be those key hubs that are really moving the needle, and you can establish that through some good primary research. So that there are ways to adjust those levers along the way, but If you are looking at it as a separate, ooh, now what, we need to measure, then you'll never find success, right? It has to be part of the onset of the program. Bring in a partner, bring in your team and say, what are those elements that we can establish, we can look and track and identify throughout, that we can look to those points. So if we see a spike, if we see a trend, we can create an action point immediately. And then that takes away some of the sting of, well, why do we want to do a measurement program just to tell us how we did? We know how we did. We did great. That's our personal assessment.
So you also spoke about common initiative that AMEC has started in the US, I think, overseas.
No, globally. So
Globally.
it is
Okay,
a global
tell us.
effort.
I don't think we have it here in India. I don't know if I'm mistaken, but I know I don't think we have it here. I would love to know what is that. Yeah.
Thank you for asking that very wonderful question. Common Ground is an effort of AMEC to bring together. So we have a lot of organizations, a lot of big agencies who are already members, but we don't have a lot of engagement in the India market, which is interesting to me, just because this is such a great community that I would think that there would be more community effort of, hey, let's all chip in together and figure out a great program so that we can all run faster and be more successful. So I would encourage all of you, if you're part of a larger agency that's already a member of AMEC, to have them dial you in so that we can establish some community here in India, but also that you're part of those other communities. We're going to be doing some kind of toolkits to train the trainer moving forward in the fall and in Q1 of 2020. So when you're talking about measurement with your team, that you have some tools and resources that are not so specific to a particular client, but that lower the barrier to even having the conversation about measurement, which is probably one of the biggest challenges, and really creating a safe environment so agencies can talk without vendors, without their clients, but in really a safe space of what are those challenges they're facing, and then how we as an association can help build resources to make that less intimidating and more effective.
Okay, great. I hope you're coming back to India to do some more of this common ground stuff.
I would love to, yes.
Okay, I will ask
Deepshikha,
one... Yeah.
unfortunately, we've completely run out
we
of
should
time.
ask. Okay, we are completely over time.
Not
Do
even
we have...
time even for the
Oh,
Q&A.
I'm so sorry. Okay, one question maybe from the audience?
No, completely out of time.
Okay.
Thank you for understanding.
Well, apologies. Sorry, like I said, we got off so well chatting. I hope I did pick up some of your questions. Otherwise, I'm sure Johna will be more than happy to talk to you and address your questions. Thank you so much again, Johna.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful being here.